Well, hello there, and welcome to another chat on Move Early, Move Often memo. I am Blake Martin.
I'm Thomas Karakolis, and today we're going to be talking about physical activity and movement as we do every week, but we're going to talk about it in relation to the immune system and specifically uh, COVID. I know it's kind of topical these days, so we'll start by having a little bit of a disclaimer ahead of time. Neither of our research backgrounds are in system or infectious disease. We both have research backgrounds in physical activity, but we are going to try and speak somewhat intelligently on the topic this morning, afternoon, today.
Yeah, I'll do my best to
Um,
talk. So, so,
so
so lead
yeah,
lead us off, Thomas, because back when we were thinking about this, we were just kind of looking at some of the anticipated stuff. So, tell me a little bit about what you were looking at early on, just in terms of some of the research.
Yeah, timeline wise, I haven't looked at any of this since about March or April of 2020, so I don't have anything that's really specific towards COVID. I know later on in this chat you'll hopefully introduce some of that new data or evidence or literature, but everything I've seen thus far shows some pretty strong correlations between light to moderate physical activity and improved immune system responses, specifically looking at infections of the respiratory tract, which
Right.
coronavirus is. So, um, to me, there seems to be a very obvious and somewhat easy preventative strategy that a lot of people can use, and that would be to be more physically active during coronavirus or
Right.
during this pandemic. The one controversy is the level of intensity of the activity. There is some evidence out there in literature that says high intensity activity could potentially lead to a suppressed immune response immediately
Right.
following for a certain period. That's controversial. There is other evidence that says that you could have a heightened immune response even with high intensity activity, but for now, it seems obvious that a recommendation could be to maintain or improve your level of physical activity as a response to this pandemic that we're in.
Right. So yeah, and one of the things in my own research on heart rate variability, and so your heart has these little beat to beat variations. It's not like a metronome, and the more responsive your heart is, it, within a given period, in general, the healthier you are, the more able you are to deal with situations. And it's both, it seems to be an indicator of the readiness of your autonomic nervous system. So it becomes a measure for a whole bunch of things. And one of the things that is quite obvious is that when there's a lot of stressors on the system, when there's a lot going on, that your heart rate variability goes down. And when your heart rate variability is low, that's often a sign that that you're in a stress situation, that you could get sick. So um, immediately post exercise, like very intense exercise, your HRV will drop a little bit. It'll typically come back up over the next couple days if you're healthy. But if you're not healthy, it'll stay down. And so when it's low, that means that you're not as responsive to situations. So just in some of the stuff I've been looking at with respect to your ability to be responsive and resilient, I think that any stressor, like those high level stressors, could have impact. I've seen in my own running behavior, if I run really, really hard, that my HRV will be down lower. And I don't know if that's going to correlate with me being sicker, but it could possibly. So I think, your cautiousness is important there.
It's actually really interesting you mentioned that though, because I think it hit the news cycle. I want to say either last week or 2 weeks ago. Some of there was a paper that was published by someone in the UK, and it looked at using exercise monitors like smartwatches, for example, to almost predict who had or didn't have coronavirus. And I think they could look retroactively because all of our smartwatches, they do have estimates of heart rate variability. And again, not an exercise physiologist here, so I can't comment on how accurate those estimates are. But there are certain research groups out there claiming that they can predict with at least some level of certainty, so beyond a 50-50 shot, based off of heart rate variability data, who is infected with coronavirus and not. And the really interesting thing about this, and I remember reading this and thinking it was super interesting, they could use their smartwatches to identify cases of coronavirus before the nasal swab test
Yeah.
could.
Yeah.
Do you remember seeing that? Am I
Yeah,
am
I
I
saw that
accurately depicting
paper.
that?
I saw that paper, and the sample size was kind of, it was relatively small. I
Okay.
actually, now I'm showing my ring that measures my heart rate
Yeah,
variability,
that's really cool.
and so um, I was a participant in a study for 9 months, looking at temperature as an early predictor, and my ring, the ring that I wear, was able to predict. We're getting off topic, but
And
this
we
is still
digress
interesting.
completely.
Isn't this still interesting?
I'm
But
interested.
no,
Yeah.
here's the important thing. The important thing is that the ring. Was able to use body temperature to predict more than 60,000 people in that study, and so yeah, so it's interesting how some of the wearables. That's a topic for another time, is wearables, but
Yep.
yeah, how it's able to predict. The important thing is though that watching your level of stress, either way,
Hmm.
is important. You don't want to have no stress on your body, because then that positive stress, the EU stress, is really important for keeping you healthy. But you don't want to have so much stress that you're putting yourself at risk, right?
Comes down to that Goldilocks effect, and it
Yeah,
just in
yeah,
science and in nature, we seem to see that time and time again. It's applicable. That little nursery rhyme is applicable to so
yeah,
many different
yeah.
things about not too hot, not too cold, just right. And
I thought it was
yeah,
watch out for bears, but I think
you
I think
completely missed the point of that nursery, the Goldilocks story, Blake.
yeah. So, what else was there? Were there other things that you guys were looking at early on?
Yeah, so the last thing that we were looking at early on, and I think this is probably the last point I'm going to make before we can hopefully jump into your stuff, is that um, obesity and other negative health predictors were even more strongly correlated to coronavirus and SARS-CoV-2 than some of the other types of infectious, like let's say influenza type viruses. So in terms of going forward, I know it's not necessarily completely applicable for this pandemic, but if we reduce physical activity, it's not just an acute immune response that could be diminished, or could end up putting society in a worse position for this pandemic. But going forward, if we start adopting these more sedentary behaviors and we're not as physically active because of our current response to the pandemic and our current lifestyle changes, that's concerning because we already struggle trying to lower obesity rates and trying to improve people's overall physical health and physical fitness. So
Yeah,
we really want to try and avoid any future negative pandemics. If we could all be healthier, I think the pandemic would obviously have a still a negative effect on our society. We'd still have to be very careful about it. It's still a big issue, but we could do certain things individually to improve potential health outcomes.
yeah. Yeah, I think that's and it's kind of having that deliberate, thoughtful, concentrated. Okay, I'm going to be active, whether it's a daily walk because you're
Yeah.
not going to work. You take that after work, that what was your commuting time, rather than laying down on the couch. Lay down on the couch for a little bit, but then get out and do a little bit of
Obviously.
a walk. You know,
Hmm.
but so it's taking that, the opportunity that's been given to us in terms of the time, and just doing a little bit of something, right?
Yeah, and I guess like so the big message that I would have hoped to have gotten across a little better, and I'm not sure that it did, especially in North America and generally the Western world. This the stay-at-home message was obviously it's important because it's a way of limiting our interactions with other people. But the real message, I think, should be just stay away from people. But if you need to leave your house to be physically active, in my mind, that's just important. If you, especially if you can do it, leave your house and avoid people when you leave your house, depending on where you live.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. And I think you know, because uh, the social isolation factor, some people really rely on a community to for their activity. So
Hmm.
they're going to go out walking with someone, or they're going to go to the gym to be with people, or things like that, or to do a class. And some classes are really yoga classes, for example, are really they're generated around the community, and so that can be difficult. But a lot of yoga providers and different fitness providers are looking for ways to develop that community online, and they are having these opportunities. My wife has just started a flamenco class, and so she's got, engaged, and they have the Brady Bunch view on their screen, and so they can see the other people who are in the class, and they take time in the middle of the class to interact with one another. And so I think that thoughtful practitioners are providing those opportunities, because the having the a lot of times activity isn't just about moving, it's about interacting with
Yeah.
people. And so finding that can be hard, especially if you're living alone. So it's really being thoughtful and focused and looking for the chance to interact with people in a meaningful way.
Yeah, so if we take this a step further, I'm going to ask you a question here because it sounds like this is where you're going, and I wonder if there's evidence to support this. But the idea that physical activity and interactions with other individuals ends up improving not only our immune response but also our mental health and our mental state. Is that also a link to positive outcomes when it comes to coronavirus?
So I don't know about coronavirus, but I know with other with stroke recovery, I do
Yeah.
know in older adults. Like I'm aware of a lot of studies where there is that where they've had people doing the activity at home versus doing the activity in a group, and doing the activity in a group actually is better for their stroke recovery. They have better outcomes. So I think it's a fairly easy jump, although it's not necessarily true that our health overall is helped by others. But I think it's pretty easy to say. And in the studies that they've done, for example, in Japan and Italy, looking at longevity, where they've the community life is really critical
Hmm.
to those outcomes, as well, to those health outcomes. And that's part of the thing. But the other thing about staying at home, when we're at home a lot, okay, so we don't move as far. We don't move in as many unpredictable ways. So, and that I talk about this a lot during the morning sessions, the importance of moving in ways that you don't prefer. So having to step out of someone's way, so we're moving a little bit to the side, or having to step over something, all those little variations in our motor patterns, they're actually really good for you, especially in terms of decreasing fall potential. So there's a lot of there's fear among the medical population right now that falls are going to increase in the elderly because they're not moving as diversely as they would normally. And I think young people fall too, but their falls aren't as catastrophic, right? So I don't think that I we're not going to see hospitalizations due to falls in younger people, but they may fall more.
Hmm.
So, and then the other thing is that in not going outside, that we have decreased vitamin D intake,
Yeah.
And the decreased
Great point.
vitamin D intake is really important for bone health, right? And so getting that exposure to the sun, getting out and getting the sun on your face, especially at this time of year, is really, really important. And so just finding those little moments to get outside and have that, and that's at risk too in this COVID environment. Is we're staying inside more, we're not moving as much, so those become important health factors as well. And you'll see subsequent declines in physical health and mental health if you're not
Hmm.
feeling as mobile. So, that becomes really concerning as well. So that a lot of that stuff that I was just talking about is out of a Brazilian Journal of Physiotherapy, but then there's the Mayo Clinic is also commenting on the impact or the importance of cardiorespiratory health, and higher cardiorespiratory fitness is if you are more fit in terms of your heart and lungs, then you have a better chance of not being hospitalized
Hmm.
from COVID if you do get it, and not having serious complications. So, um, again, this isn't my area of expertise. I'm citing the literature here, but it's pretty simple. So, things that you can do to improve your cardiorespiratory fitness is get out and walk for more than 20 minutes. And if you can do a little bit of, if you're the kind of person who can kind of jog or get on an exercise bike or cross country ski, so that your heart rate is getting up, a little bit over 135 or something like that, depending on your age, then you want to be doing that as well, because you're kind of getting into that zone where you're just kind of pushing your heart to be a little more fit.
Hmm.
So
The
go.
I guess the last point that I want to make, just to sort of wrap it up here, is that at least from a public health response locally from where we are, it seemed like in the summer and early fall, we were actually doing a really good job of encouraging people to be outside and be active,
Yeah,
and use that as a almost a prophylactic or a preventative type of measure.
yeah,
During the last couple months, when the case numbers have risen, the focus seems to have been removed from that. And it's concerning to me because I don't know if there's an obvious way to kind of, especially in the winter months when it's cold up here, how do you bring the focus back on to something that we feel is very important?
right. So I think there's a few things, and if you're in a northern climate, and we are, the one thing that I tell all new Canadians that I meet, if they're asking me about how to enjoy winter, the,
Get a
the
good jacket.
get layers.
Hmm.
Put on lots of layers. If you wear a good jacket, yeah, for sure, and boots and gloves, yes. But layers of things, like not tight fitting layers, and get outside and find an activity that you love, whether it's throwing snowballs at the neighbor children, or building snowmen with
Only
the
you,
neighbor
Blake.
children, or building snowmen with the neighbor children, or um, or tobogganing, or just walking in the snow. Just if you are warmly dressed and you're finding a reason to be outside rather than winter happening to you, but you're saying, okay, there's something I want to do, and
Yeah.
and finding that thing, and there's lots of local skating rinks in that are available, and you can find ways to be distanced. You sometimes have to choose your timing
Yeah.
well, because the trails in our neck of the woods are very populated on
Yeah.
Saturday mornings. They're crazy,
Oh,
so you got to kind
all
of avoid that.
all great points, Blake. I think we really hit it on this one. I enjoyed this conversation. So
Yeah.
so thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And I think, just to sum it up, just move
Yeah.
as much as you can, find excuses to move, dress warmly, get outside if you can, and if you can't get outside, stay inside, and find a group of people online who want to move. They're there,
Perfect.
I promise you. I'll see if I can find a couple links, and oh, wait, we have this whole channel, right?
Move early, move often.
Yeah. So you could join us every morning if you wanted to, and we'd be happy to have you. And but unfortunately, we don't have the interactivity that right now that I would like to. But still, um,
We'll we'll work on it.
we're working on it.
All
Okay.
right. Take care, Blake.
Take care. See ya.
Bye.